Welcome back to the program. Thanks for staying with us. Now, some presume he would know everything the president knows before he, and I'm talking about the president, knows it. And as presidential chief of staff since 2016, he's been a key player in projects that will define Uhuru's legacy. Now, we're talking about my guest this evening, Nzioka Waita, a lawyer by profession. He's also been a team leader in the presidential delivery unit that the president used to oversee his development agenda. With Uhuru's second term approaching the end, what next? He joins us on the program to have that discussion. Nzioka, thanks so much for making time for us this evening.
Thank you, Wahid.
Let me actually start by hearing this from you. What has the experience been like working in the highest office in the land for the most powerful man in the land?
It's been humbling. It's been extremely humbling and extremely fulfilling for me as an individual. I have worked with colleagues whom I have learned more than, in 7 years, than in my entire working career of 15 years at Safaricom. The 7 years has been the real lesson in life for me. I've had the privilege to work alongside public servants that have served 3 presidents. My immediate boss, head of public service, Dr. Kenyatta, has served President Moi, President Kibaki, and now President Kenyatta. And just listening and learning has been one of the most rewarding experiences for me.
Okay. Yeah. Some would say your response is rather diplomatic. Yeah. Like any job, I'm sure there are highs and lows. Any lows, long nights, tough deadlines, the nation on your shoulders? We
sleep in the office. We leave the office at 5. You guys will see the president at 10. Everything looks good, but everyone is operating on 1 hour or 2 hours of sleep, because he's so fastidious. He likes to rehearse, he likes to practice. He doesn't like half-baked stuff. So if you give him a half-baked product, you stay until it's fully cooked.
And that's been the last 7 years or so for you.
That's been 7 years.
Let's talk about what the future will look like as Kenyans talk about the legacy of President Uhuru Kenyatta. In your words, as someone who's worked so closely with him, what is that legacy beginning to look like?
It's beginning to look like takeoff. We've gone through an extremely difficult period of heavy investments that have taken its toll on the public exchequer, heavy investments that in the face of the pandemic have really put a strain on the country. But those investments have set the country on the trajectory for growth. They are investments that secure our future as the leader in this region. They are investments that position our economy for a sustainable but increased growth. Everything we are doing, all indicators are pointing towards, first of all, what we call a major recovery from the pandemic. But number 2, people can now sort of see what the future looks like in terms of big investments, in terms of enablers to the economy, connectivity, affordability of power, improvement of security, digitization of large parts of our economy. Mm-hmm. And these are all things that lend themselves to investor confidence and making Kenya the destination of choice.
Okay. You've given us a very optimistic outlook on the president's legacy.
Yes.
But for those who compare the president's promises in 2013 and 2017 to Kenyans and today,
yes,
there's a feeling that in certain areas he has fallen short. Creation of jobs is one. Over 1 million jobs per year was promised. KNBS stats reveal that at some point it was 1.8 million jobs only in a period of 6 years, maybe 800,000 in a good year as well. There's a falling short there. UHC coverage. There was a promise of 100% by 2022. I don't know what we're at now. We're hearing estimates of 36%. How do you put those together when you think about the promises that were made, but the reality on the ground with a few months to the end of his term?
Like any scorecard, there will be successes and there will be misses. If we take the examples that you have mentioned, for example, employment, we were growing steadily at about 800,000 jobs, formal jobs a year, still not absorbing what was in the market. But we were able to generate significant number of jobs for people coming into the work environment. If you look at the KNBS stats, we had even managed to deal with those confronting underemployment, because there's a lot of temporary opportunities that came about from a number of sectors, particularly in the service sector. Then we had the events of March 2020, which, as you know, devastated our economy. And were it not for some of the investments and the prudence, fiscal prudence by our National Treasury, the Central Bank, and the leadership of the President, we would not have managed to come out through that period unscathed. But surprisingly, some sectors actually demonstrated such robust growth, particularly in the food production sector and in some of our horticultural exports, up to a point where the constraint became logistics, not production, not demand. It became connecting our product to the customer, because logistics took a big hit during the pandemic. When we look at UHC, the evidence of the success of the investment in the health sector sits right before you. We have countries in Europe, in the United States, that have lost millions of people to COVID. In Kenya, the numbers are published every day for you to see. You don't hide dead bodies. Everyone can see for themselves. Is
that something you attribute to government effort, or scientists are still trying to find out if Africa was lucky?
That's a narrative being peddled by people who don't believe Africans can run their own countries. They don't believe Africans are capable of governing themselves. And this disease killed everyone. You know people who died. I know people who died. COVID did not discriminate. It was ruthless in how it took. But Kenyans, under the guidance and leadership of their government, were able to follow protocols in every corner of the country, were able to take measures to protect themselves. But most critically, our healthcare infrastructure did not collapse. We had people in ICU who got in and got out. There were people who needed oxygen who got it. Today, Kenya is in an oxygen surplus position in our public hospitals. This is not the same position that we had in 2019. A number of ICU beds have gone up. The number of ventilators went up. Our capacity to produce oxygen, the churning out of medical professionals, right from medical clinicians to doctors, were deployed. They worked selflessly. Our medical fraternity answered the call. Yes, could we have done better? Like any other country, we could have done better. But Kenya somehow, through the investment in health infrastructure, has managed to, number one, contain the pandemic. Number two, give the public access to medical treatment.
Okay.
The big strides in UHC. Let's talk about the big strides. National Health Insurance Fund, now completely reformed, taking now covering close to 7 million people today. We look at level 2, level 3 hospitals in terms of the penetration of dispensaries and clinics. And this is largely through the efforts of devolved governments to roll out this infrastructure. Level 4 and level 5, the improvement of diagnostic capacity. So what this has done is you see less strain on Moi referral in Eldoret, less strain on Kenyatta National Hospital, less strain on Bagathi. And all this is because our health system is slowly but surely coming into sync. There are big gaps, but we need to address them.
And I think no one doubts the stats that you're giving us this evening. And clearly, you came prepared with the numbers.
Yes.
I think the question is, when you look at promises that were made consecutively, 2013, 2017, and the reality today, if you were to grade the government today that you work for, what would you give it?
I would say about 70%. And I would say 70% because we took a big hit. Let's not underrate the impact of what has happened in the last 2 years. We've been knocked back significantly in terms of just our ability to generate revenue for capital expenditure, for development, and to meet some of our aspirations. So, like I've said before, our dreams were this big, but our resource envelope was this big. And that's a reality that no amount of PR can take away.
Some would say even the debt that Kenya's gotten into is this big.
Yes.
The return on that debt, unfortunately, isn't catching up, and we may find ourselves in a perilous situation in the days to come.
You know, you guys have been saying this from 2014. We are still waiting for this.
We rely on World Bank data, KNBS, Treasury. We don't churn these numbers out from the skies.
What you look at is debt to GDP ratio, debt to revenue ratio. The question you should be asking is, number one, all our debt instruments, international debt instruments, are sovereign. They are sovereign. When have they been called in? I mean, if you have a problem with your bank, the bank sends you a letter and says, boss, we are looking at your car because we're going to auction it. You're not servicing your debt. Number one, Kenya continues to service its debt. Number two, Kenya continues to use its debt funding for development in critical sectors that have immediate economic returns on the country.
What's the opportunity cost of that debt? How much money that Kenya could have allocated to healthcare or anything else is going to repay debt first before anything else?
But healthcare in what hospitals? Healthcare with what equipment? People get to hospital on what roads? I mean, we must stop taking a short-term view to development. You have children, or you will have children. These children will ask you, what was happening when you people were in power? How come we don't have roads? When I go to South Africa, when I go to Egypt, when I go to London, how come there are roads to everywhere? And I hear Kenyans arguing that we don't need roads. Why? Because you don't have a car today, or because you have nowhere to go? We must stop benchmarking our country with mediocrity. The reason we have invested so heavily in an infrastructure gap, because we are only actually catching up with what we should have. If you look at the master plan done for Nairobi in the 1970s by our city planners, we're actually only just catching up with it now. There's nothing new. Maybe the only new thing that has happened in Nairobi's big mega infrastructure is the expressway. But if you talk about the southern, eastern, western, and northern bypasses, these were all in the master plan. If we talk about the Red Hill link roads, we talk about the Kilimani link road going into Langata, we talk about Ngong Road going to Ngong, we talk about the roads that need to be built to Rongai and Kiserian, all those were factored into our development plan. But what happened? We had leaders who did not prioritize those developments, or took them at a pace where they thought the people's appetite could handle. But the president actually made a decision, and he said, look, we better do this thing now. And we better do this thing now because our neighbors are not asleep. You've traveled. You're a well-schooled man. You know what's going on in the neighboring countries. This site we see in Nairobi under construction is replicated everywhere in sub-Saharan Africa. Nairobi is under construction. Kenya is under construction. But don't be deceived that we are the only people trying to get ahead. If you go to Kigali today, they have a new airport coming on stream. If you go into Kampala today and you see the roads they have built from Entebbe going into Kampala and what they are doing to decongest their city, to make it an economic hub. When they talk about economic hub, what are these people doing? They want to plan how to get financial investors out of Nairobi and into their country. So when those jobs go, those are jobs for our people, for our children. That is money that should be in our economy. So we make no apologies
Chief of Staff,
for this infrastructure.
No one argues with the benefits that those projects will bring, some complete, some not complete. I think the question has always been, one, the financing models.
Yes.
And two, even when you look at the numbers that government puts out there, GDP is growing and so forth, there's a concern that we are seeing high GDP because of public spending, not high GDP because private sector is thriving. So people don't have jobs, but we have many construction sites. When you listen to even politicians today, ODM leader Raila Odinga today spoke about spurring private sector. Why is private sector suffering, even with all these construction sites?
Okay, it's a chicken and egg scenario. You know, one of the biggest challenges the private sector has had And you know, we have a very regular engagement through private sector industry groups. I was privileged to attend private sector groups when they were chaired by President Kibaki, and I was part and parcel of chairing some of President Kenyatta's roundtables. Mm-hmm. And in the course of these engagements, some of the key things were logistics. Why can't we move cargo from the port? The roads are too narrow. We can't move from point A to B. Kenya is just too expensive to do business. We don't have the kind of infrastructure we need. Those were all the stories happening in 2012, 2013. People saying, look, the government is not doing enough to give us an enabling environment. Now, fast forward, 8 years later, the government has bit the bullet, committed the resources, taken the loans, and built the infrastructure. Now, as a consequence, access to credit, you've sort of squeezed out the private sector from a lot of this. People would rather spend money, banks would rather do T-bills.
Government and yes.
The government is a good borrower and a good payer, right? And the reason why they lend the government, because the government always pays and honors its debts.
And you don't feel you're stifling the people that need to use those roads?
The people now have an opportunity because their economies are opening up. So take, for example, Nyandarua. Let's take an example of Nyandarua. 8 years ago, there was no road, passable road, from Uhuru to Ojororok, to Olkalau, to Engineer, to Jabini. That's our breadbasket. Some of those roads, like the one between Kanyanyaine and Jabini, would be tarmacked and they would disappear after 3 months because the contractors would use watercolors. But when the president came in and decided to really focus on quality infrastructure, right, we have opened up the whole potato economy in Nyandarua. If you go to North Rift today and you see the roads that traverse our food-producing areas. You go to counties, you go to places in Uasin Gishu, Kaptagat, Naiberi, all these places where if you go into Elgeyo from Kapsowar all the way until Mbobut and all those places there, all those roads have unlocked huge economic potential and have empowered millions of Kenyans. And you don't see those Wananchi arguing because we have changed their lives. We have changed their lives. That infrastructure, I heard somebody saying that people don't eat roads. That is the most pedestrian thing any leader can say.
You don't see their perspective there?
There is no perspective because they have a duty to tell their people that what we have done, why you need this infrastructure is because you cannot continue walking to hospital. You cannot be spending 8 hours on the road taking an expectant mother to deliver a child. You do need these roads.
So where is the balance? Because if you raid the country's purse strings to fill the country with roads, but there's no money in the bank at the end of the day, even in your personal bank account,
yes.
Doesn't matter how many beautiful roads we have.
Yes.
What are we going to do about that? Because that is the concern that economists have. And the World Bank and IMF continue to come to warn us, be careful. The central bank governor, in a quote recently, stating that where our debt direction is headed is up.
Yes.
It's not a good place to be,
yes.
Zio Waita.
Yes.
Do you ever sit in meetings with your bosses?
Yes.
And wonder, as more debt is taken on?
Yes. But you ask, what is it for, what is it doing, and what is the return? Do you assume that all those people sitting in a room are a bunch of circus monkeys? You know, they do know what they are planning for. Kenya has the best and brightest, right? The reason why we stand head and shoulders above all the countries on the continent is because Kenya is taking its economy, its infrastructure, and its just the way competitiveness of our environment in the right direction. Is there a bitter pill to swallow in the process? Yes. Are there measures to stimulate the economy to grow? Yes. Are there policy decisions that must be made in order to help our economy to grow? Yes. So one of the things that you will see is from 2019, 2020, the country has pivoted more towards PPP. So we are releasing public sector infrastructure that can be monetized away from the exchequer and putting that in the hands of private sector, because we feel that some of the projects that we were funding before, and we don't have the headroom to fund in the same manner. So instead of doing EPCF contracts on a road that is bankable, that can generate toll traffic, and that can pay for itself, let us remove those funds and build those roads where there's some form of affirmative action needed.
And this infrastructure discussion is one we can have for a long time,
yes,
but I am looking at the clock, and I do have other questions I need to ask you.
Yes.
Before we wrap this particular segment up, when the history books are written about the president's legacy, what will those books say about the role of Deputy President William Ruto?
His Excellency, the Deputy President, is an extremely meticulous individual. I've worked closely with him, more so during the first term of President Kenyatta's leadership. I found that he's been was extremely knowledgeable about the country, extremely knowledgeable and intuitive about what people needed at the time. But, you know, in recent days, we haven't seen much of him. So we don't know.
It doesn't
from our work point of view, I can't really comment because, you know, we do meet occasionally on national days, but the government continues to function optimally. The president's agenda continues to be delivered. His Excellency, the Deputy President, is still the Deputy President of Kenya, so he does have his role and he must be respected as such. But, you know, he will write his own legacy himself. It's not us, it's not for us to say. And at the end of the day, I think Kenyans will make an intelligible judgment about his contribution to our country's growth and economy and stability of our nation.
One last question on the economy. What sort of economy will the president hand over to the next head of state? Something that will be happening later on this year?
So, which answer do you want?
The one you
if you take the empirical data that you yourself are looking at, you will know that we are now on the third consecutive quarter of 8% growth. But this is 8% growth. When we saw the first 9% statistic that came out from KNBS, everyone was cautious, and rightfully so. But when we saw the next quarter's growth of 8%, we started being a bit more optimistic. But when we saw the third quarter's estimate at 8%, we knew that something positive is happening. Is the president alive to the fact that he needs to do more to stimulate sectors that have taken a big hit? Yes, he does. The budget statement that is coming in a few months will reflect that reality. So the economy, in terms of pure stats, is healthy and it's growing well. What will the next government inherit? It will need to probably be a little more innovative in how it funds public infrastructure and probably double down.
Not conservative.
Probably double down. And I'll say why not conservative. Because the resource envelope is just being what KRA have managed to do in the last 2 years. Should be an indicator of what has been going on from a revenue collection point of view. People have not been paying their taxes. Actually, even those who are capable of paying their taxes have not been paying their taxes.
Can I get a comment from you on a tweet? Can we put that tweet up? You've mentioned KRA and tax, and Mohamed Welie, economist, referring to a tweet by a journalist about a supplementary budget. Do we have that? There we go. So Ali Manzu had tweeted earlier on supplementary budget, State House budget ramped up to 47%. 8.8 billion from 3.98 billion in financial year ending June. Then Mohamed Welie said, I think revenue collection has been good. I hear KRA is 5% ahead of budget as of November 2021. This supplementary budget, however, means the extra revenue won't go to help in consolidation. Fiscal consolidation is thus a mirage. I pity the next administration. They will just caretake for IMF. So those are the concerns of economists today.
Yes.
Fiscal consolidation, a mirage. KRA will just continue to beat harder on Kenyans, and the next admin will have to tighten the belt considerably. Let me get your final answer on that.
Well, let me not delve too deep in the economics. I mean, there are people whose subject matter, that's their specialty. But I would say this, the KRA have not done any magic. What they have done is simply knock on people's doors and ask them to pay what is due. They have also, believe it or not, increased the level of ADR, alternative dispute resolution, in tax collection. People are finding it much easier to deal with the KRAs on disputed matters. So I don't think I owe you this. The KRA says, I think you owe me this. But what they do is they sit, they go before a tribunal, and they come to a conclusion. The willingness of more and more people to pay tax, the blockage of leakages. We are possibly leaving another 1 trillion shillings on the table in uncollected taxes. And KRA is doggedly and deliberately finding those gaps and making people pay. What the government has a duty to do, and I believe will continue to do, is to demonstrate to the public that taxes which are collected are properly utilized and accounted for.
Okay. Ziokawaita, I want to switch gears. I mean, and hopefully we can have another forum to talk more about the economy, because that is what many Kenyans are concerned about this evening. But I also want to talk a little bit about what possibly could be next for you. I want to begin by inquiring from you why there is a large billboard with your picture on it, at least not just one, on Mombasa Road. What's that all about?
Oh, there are many.
There are many. I heard. I've only seen one.
There are many billboards. It's a declaration of intent.
Intent to do what? For those who haven't seen the billboard.
I want to go back home. I come from Machakos County, and I'd like to go back home and work for the people of Machakos County. And I will be vying for the governorship of Machakos County.
You are leaving the quote-unquote safe environment of technocracy to the murky waters of politics. Nothing's off the table in that space.
Being a bureaucrat where we work is not always a safe space. It's just that we handle our matters quietly, but it is it's not far from the wild, wild west.
So you've picked a few lessons along the way.
Many.
You might be facing against experienced, hardened politicians, Johnson Muthama, UDA, Wavinya Ndeti as well. And many would say that you don't really have much political experience. Why do you think you can take them on?
I have no political experience. I'm an administrator. I fix problems. I fix problems for a corporation for 15 years. It's the leading corporation and remains the leading corporation in Kenya. I have fixed problems for my president and for my country. I continue to do so. Now it's time to go fix problems for my people. We have one senator, one female women rep. We have 60 MCAs and 8 MPs. We don't need any more politicians. I think the county has enough politicians, and they have an environment in which they can politic, and there's a role for politicians to play. I just want to go and look after the money for my people, make sure they get the services that they need, and make sure that they have the best county in Kenya. I want to turn county number 016 into the best county in Kenya, and it is very easy, and it's a very straightforward affair, and none of my competitors has the aptitude or the pedigree to do that job.
Okay, the voters will have to determine that. But there are those who say that, isn't this political gambling? At the moment, we don't know if you have any political grassroots networks, that maybe you're only banking on your proximity to the president to get the seat. Is it a gamble worth getting into?
A president will not be with me after the 9th. President will continue running the country. He will release us to go carry on this work. And that will happen for 6 months. And I think people will judge for themselves whether I'm capable of leading the economy of Machakos, because that is what I want to do. Do I want to go and spar in political arguments and bickering with my competitors? No, it's not really the question. I think we have 8 MPs with phenomenal access to resources that need to be complemented by the county government. We have MCAs who struggle to return back into office because none of their budgets allow for development at ward level. And we have senators who have an interest and a stake in the county but are never consulted. So I really want to change that, because I'm not coming in to compete with any of these people. I want to come in and work for them and help them to manage their money, because politicians have their role to play. There's a lot of work for them to do, but the work of governors really is not the domain of hardcore politicians, because they don't have the attention span. They don't have the time. They have their political favorites, their political bases, so they'll only work for those people. I will work for all the people in that county. I have, for 7 years, Wahiga, let me tell you, when you work for the president of Kenya, you cannot go and sit in a bar, right? Your social life is curtailed. You can't just go wherever you want and talk to whomever you want.
And yet everybody fights for that job.
Everyone fights for that job, but the reality is you go home in the evening and you can't speak about anything you've done. You can't speak about half the things you know, because it is the price you must pay for service. And when you go to the county government, I get shocked by what I see with some of the leaders, because it's not a theater. It's not a theater. It's a place where you need to be with the people, understand what they want, and show them how it will get done. And really, that's what I intend to do.
Aren't you being overly optimistic? And, last week we had Natembeya here in studio.
Yes.
He almost said the same thing. I'm here to sanitize our politics. But there is a dance that is already ongoing in that arena, and you sometimes have no choice but to get into that dance as well. Will you really be able to carry out this different brand of politics that you're talking about?
I'm not going to change the politics. I mean, the politics is what it is. For you to be governor, you must go through a political process. You have to convince people to elect you. I am not incapable of talking to 600,000 voters and explaining to them my agenda. They will choose whether they want to elect me or not. They will choose what risks they are prepared to take. If they want to give the leadership of their county to people who have never handled budgets larger than 100 million, the choice is up to them, right? But I will convince them that their resources are in safe hands, number one, that we will consult them and deliver their development agenda, number two, and number three, that I owe the people of Machakos a duty of care to bring them closer to the center of government. Remember, 15% of revenue goes to the counties. Maybe right now in practice it's more 20%, but constitutionally it's 15%. There is 85% of the revenue that still goes to development. And the only way you can get a share of that 85% is to lobby for it. I admire, there are certain governors in this country who spend a lot of time in the offices of PSs and ministers because they have come to fight for resources for their people. I want to be in that queue. I want to be able to say, here is our 15% given to us by the national government. Here is our X billion from own source revenue. And here is what I'm going to do to fight for the Machakos County, number one, to get the road infrastructure that it deserves, being within the metropolitan area. I want it to get access to water. I have been very involved in the water sector with the Honorable Cabinet Secretary for Water, delivering on water infrastructure. I know what those dams and northern collectors, I know where that water is destined to, and I want it to get to my people.
And that's part of your campaign promise. And I know you have
that is my agenda, and I can tell them, I know for a fact where all those programs sit, what resources will take, what the national government can do and cannot do. And I also want to explain to them that when revenue is collected from the county, they will see it reflecting in the budget of the county. It's not going to be spirited away anywhere. And these are things I can commit to. I have been in the public service for 7 years. 7 years now. I have stayed away from problems. I have focused on my work.
You mean you've been publicly accused of corruption? It's another way of putting it.
You can call it what it is, but people have, I put my professional credentials ahead of everything else. I am happy to go home and stay with my family if the citizens of Machakos decide they do not want me as their governor. But if they choose that they would want me as their governor, I'll work for them night and day. And I'll plan only for 5 years, because it's only God who can decide whether we'll get a second term.
So when do you officially begin your campaigns? When's the last day in office?
I'll work until the 9th of February at 5 p.m., as is the norm. Until the end. I will go and see the head of public service, and I will hand over what needs to be handed over to him. And I will make a farewell call to His Excellency the President and ask for his blessings and support, and to thank him for the privilege of allowing me to work for the people of Kenya and to be in his service and to have earned his trust to be able to work for him for 7 years.
I know I need to take a break, come back, lots of questions, but we've seen the colors on your billboards in Machakos. But judging by the party colors, are they linked to any particular party that you're looking to work with?
They're not linked to any particular party, but I'm in constant touch with the leadership of the community, and I continue to engage them almost on a daily basis. My heart, my conscience, and my commitment to this country will not allow me to stray far from the president.
Okay, very cryptic statement there.
I will not turn my back on the president.
I have 1 or 2 questions about Machakos and a few tweets and SMSs as well. Let's take that break. Nzioka Waita announcing it here. You may have seen the billboards and a few other things. I think there's even a website. I hear there's a website. And he said it here, last day, 9th February, and then he's going out there into the murky world of politics. But he says, you know what? Even where I've been, it hasn't been smooth sailing, but he reckons he survived and he's going to survive this next run. It's up to the voters out there in Machakos County. We've got a few more questions for him, and I'm seeing your feedback. 22422 is the SMS line, #NewsNight. Let's take a short break. We come back, and I pose those questions to him. We'll be right back.